It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts Alex Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Fun episode yesterday. If you guys missed it, Pat Fryermuth joined the show. I will put the link in the description to that show. If you guys missed that one, be sure to go back, check it out. Basically the same caliber of guest on today's show as well. Steelers DB Derrick Bell joining the show. DB, what's going on, brother?
Oh, yeah. Definitely going to be an interesting person to try and follow. It's a tough act to follow. Shout out to Pat. But definitely going to be an interesting next couple, days. None of us are going to get any sleep over the next 3-4 days, I'm sure. Draft weekend, the best time of the year. So really excited about that and excited to talk some ball.
Absolutely. I was going to ask if you've gotten any sleep recently, because for me, 2 of the last 3 nights, haven't slept well. But I anticipate being up very late tomorrow. We'll see about tonight. I should get some good sleep tonight, honestly, but I know you won't.
Yeah, no, we're in full draft mode, man. We're going energy drinks, guns ablaze, and balls to the wall. I'm excited. I'm not going to sleep for the next week.
Alan, where are you at with this? Because obviously,
I'm going to sleep.
I was just saying, you've put out a 3-round.
Definitely sleeping.
You've put out your 3-round mock draft. We'll dive into that a little bit. But for you, is there much more that you can do draft wise from now until tomorrow?
No, honestly, I think the best thing that I can do is not pay attention to nonsense. I feel like about half the things that I am reading and hearing right now are just either obviously smoke screens or people looking for attention. I'm like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Like, I don't feel like I'm learning anything new. I feel like I would be better off if I went fishing today. I mean, obviously there was news, and we're going to talk about the real news that did actually happen. But I'm not going to learn anything I don't already know about this draft class at this stage, unless somebody makes a trade or something big, bad that people have been trying to keep quiet gets out, or, something like that. But the Steelers are not trading up to 12 for Quinyon Mitchell, and they're not taking Michael Penix at 20. And stop. I'm not learning anything more from the media landscape. So for me, I'm actually kind of I feel like my work is done. I'm ready for Thursday night.
All right. Well, we have a prop. So you're saying I should cancel this Michael Penix Jr. jersey order that I just placed?
I mean, it could be fun for I don't know what, but yeah, I mean, DH gate, $25, worth a chance.
DH gate. I was expecting to hear that name on this podcast today. But yeah, let's talk about the actual news, though. I think everybody got into a little bit of a tizzy on X when the Steelers restructured Alex Highsmith's deal. It was the basic restructure, clearing them. Was it over $7 million, or is it exactly $7 million?
Just over $7 million.
Just over $7 million. And that gets everybody thinking, okay, what are we doing just before one day before the draft? Are they up to something? Or is this just for, they had enough money, right, for the draft class regardless without doing this. So I think everybody's mind starts to go, what's the intention here with doing this?
Well, they didn't have enough money for the draft class without this, but they don't need the money for the draft class until they sign the draft class, which doesn't usually happen until a couple weeks afterwards. And they had about $12 million in offseason cap space. Basically, they were going to have to do this at some point anyway. They are now still, according to our projection, and it is a projection, because you don't know exactly what's going to happen in terms of guys that get hurt, go on the injured reserve, need replaced, how much exactly they want as an injury buffer going into the season, that kind of things like that. But I have them projected at basically zero. Right now, they are basically where they would want to be. So anything more they spend for the rest of the offseason, they're going to have to find a way to make back. Now, there are more ways they can make it back. They can restructure the contracts of Minka Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt. They can do something with Cam Hayward, whether that's an extension or some kind of void year restructure, whatever. So they needed to make this money at some point anyway. You make it now because if you do want to trade for somebody, you do have to have the available cap space to complete the trade. So if they want to trade for Brandon Ayuk or Cortland Sutton, I think Sutton's cap hit to the Steelers would be something like $13.7 million. They only had 12.1. They had to do something, right? I think Ayuk's is a little bit more than that. And so They did not have the cap space at hand immediately to just flip a switch and make that move. Now they do. I don't know that it necessarily means that something like that is coming, but it's a common sense step if you think something like that might be happening, and you're probably going to do this anyway.
Derrick, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Alan kind of hit the nail on the head. They were going to have to do this regardless, right? So regardless of if they were going to do it later or now, I think this just gives them financial flexibility to do something on draft night. I get the feeling that the Steelers do want a bigger wide receiver. I think that you can kind of read the tea leaves on all the guys that they've had interest in. You just look in free agency. Tyler Boyd, Mike Williams, they've been kind of snooping around a little bit on Brandon Ayuk, Cortland Sutton now. Like these bigger bodied receivers that typically Arthur Smith gravitates towards, I think makes sense. And if you look at the draft, like on day 2, they haven't shown any interest in Jalen Pope. They have shown interest in Ricky Pearsall, who's more of like a thin-framed guy, more of a route runner than like a bigger wide receiver, in my opinion. And then Xavier Legette, who has been going on social media saying that Carolina's promised that they're going to take him at 33 overall. So who is going to be there at that point? I mean, 51 or whatever seems extremely early for Malachi Corley, in my opinion, but like he would be – and like he's just not ready to play, I feel like, in terms of being like your number 2 wide receiver. So I think a trade at this point to me seems extremely likely. We'll see if it actually ends up playing out like that, but I would bet on something happening.
And do you lean the Cortland Sutton route? Because I mean, I certainly do. Like if someone were to tell me, hey, the Steelers are trading for a receiver, who do you think it's going to be? I'm going to guess Cortland Sutton.
Alan, is that your guess as well? If it happens,
I think if it happens this weekend, it's Cortland Sutton. I don't have a very hard time seeing the 49ers trading Ayuk right now. What they're asking for is not going to happen. I have a hard time seeing them drop their demands far enough to make a deal happen right now. It doesn't hurt them to let him play out the contract and try to win a Super Bowl this year. Like it just doesn't hurt them that much.
I think they're going to be working to trade Debo in the process.
And there's a lot of moving parts here. He's in like what the other thing is like I don't understand why they can make the money to sign him. Like they are not in some like cap position where they're just like completely screwed and they have to get rid of a guy. Like I have a hard time seeing the 49ers getting to a point where they're ready to get rid of Brandon Ayuk this weekend. I think if it happens, it'll be over the summer and it'll be for 2025 draft picks. And honestly, I think that's a better place for the Steelers to want to live anyway. I think if one happens this year, it's definitely Cortland Sutton. And I agree about the big receivers. And I think, like, look, this is a really deep wide receiver class. We've said that a lot. But if we sort of assume that the Steelers are not going to go wide receiver in the first round and that you're limiting yourself to 51-84 in terms of getting a wide receiver, there are a lot of guys there, but a lot of the guys are smaller guys. Like it is not exactly like, I mean, and some of the bigger guys are like weird big projects like Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson and Brendan Rice. Like I'm not saying those guys can't be good players, but they're not exactly like plug and play starters, like they're guys with upside that might need some tinkering. And so Malachi Corley, same thing. And so I think if I'm looking at this draft class and saying, hey, I need 2 wide receivers that are going to play right away, I think the slot options in terms of guys that could just walk in and play are a lot more refined than the outside guys, and especially in terms of rounds 2 and rounds 3. So it makes sense to want a guy like Cortland Sutton, who I think could walk in and be a good starter. And, I think they'd be in pretty good shape. The thing about him is, what does he want in terms of a contract? He wants a new deal. He's set to make $17 million this year, but he's only got $2 million guaranteed. So if you can jack up the guaranteed money and get him at a reasonable number, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I said about the Debo thing because I was talking to somebody. I have a friend that covers the 49ers and kind of been going back and forth with them regarding this situation. And they've been like on a straight path. This is not like Brandon Ayuk is not being traded. They've said that the entire time. And he said people that cover the team kind of get the sense that it's almost like a last dance type feel with this group. Like they know that they're going to lose pieces after the season. A lot of people have talked. That's why I mentioned the Debo thing. Like I think that they would rather trade him than move on from Brandon Ayuk and would rather get something done with Ayuk. And you look at Debo's contract, and apparently, like they were even saying, they get the sense teams have called but aren't willing to offer them more than like a 4th round pick because of the contract that he carries over to whatever team acquires him. So I don't know. Going to be interesting to see what happens, but I wanted to add that little nugget of information with the conversation that I had. Like it just seems like most people there, despite the outside noise, have been steadfast and like this isn't happening.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is with Ayuk. I actually think if they're going to deal him, it's going to be this weekend because I think, like you guys kind of alluded to. Yeah, I mean, I think what you guys said about the Niners being in a Super Bowl window, that's what kind of leads me to believe that Ayuk, if he is dealt, it's going to be this weekend. And I don't know that that's necessarily a Pittsburgh or, I think it's still pretty likely that they want to hang on to him because I don't see why you would get rid of him. In my opinion, I think he's extremely talented and, a top 10 caliber of wide receiver. So if the Steelers had a chance to get him, especially without sacrificing a full 1st round pick, I would be all over that, even knowing that you're going to have to give him a massive extension on top of that. Now, the Sutton thing's interesting because he does fit the profile of like being a bigger bodied receiver. Like Alan said, there is some discussion that he could potentially want, another contract. I think that kind of the Steelers don't have any like long-term pieces right now on offense, right? Like they don't have any like guys that are signed for multiple years beyond this year. So it almost feels weird to me that Sutton going into his age 29 season would be somebody they'd want to like build around. And I don't think that he's that caliber of player anyway. I think he's like a solid wide receiver too. But I do think that he's a better short-term option than anyone the Steelers are going to be able to get definitely beyond 51 in terms of just being able to play next year. My biggest concern there is, and I've kind of hit on this a little bit on Twitter when he first started coming up in some of these discussions, is like Smith's offense when it had their issues in the past has been because they just like he doesn't have enough juice on the outside to really like open things up. And I think that would be a pretty big problem with Sutton and Pickens because their skill sets are a little bit repetitive. George has the juice to get deep. Sutton is more of a guy that wins with like just body control and contested catch ability. Like even at this stage of his career, he's not a really good separator. And I just don't know if they're going to have enough guys that are going to be able to get consistently open on the outside should they fall behind and start having to throw the ball. And maybe that's just not something they're overly concerned with because they have this really strict vision on how they want to win offensively. But it would concern me because I just think at some point, especially if you get into the playoffs, like you're going to have to throw the ball around and like you have to have guys that can win and create separation. And I don't know that Sutton's the guy that I think fixes that problem that they have.
I don't think it's a very good long-term fix. I think it's a very good short-term solution. I think it can certainly work for this year. Would I sign him to a 4-year deal? Probably not.
Yeah, and
yeah.
That's why
I was just go ahead.
That's why I think like if they gave up like some like mid-round pick, like some like 4th round pick or some type of like mid-round pick swap, I could get it. But like I said earlier, I just don't think that I would be wanting to give him another deal that extends beyond like his current one. Just because if I'm looking at this from the lens, if you're looking to give a trade for a receiver and then give someone a contract extension, I want to go get the best one available. If that's Ayuk, I would just go pay him a massive amount of money and say, this is our foundational piece that we're going to build this thing around. And again, I have no problem with that. It just really comes down to like what the asking price and if like he's like, if they're willing to let him go for that price. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting discussion. Like I said, I think it just makes it complicated because it seems like the guys that they've actually shown interest in this class, like Xavier Legette, A.D. Mitchell, like those bigger bodied guys, like are probably not going to be there in the second round. So like, how are you going to acquire them? Would they take them at 20? It doesn't seem like that's probably the route they're going to go. So it's just an interesting discussion on how they could make it work without a veteran trade.
I almost what I come back to when talking to these two names is like, okay, IU takes receiver out of the question, at least early. They could still, I guess, take one later on in the draft. But what is your take on, like, okay, if they go and get Cortland Sutton, is it still in play for them to go and get one on day 2? You know, a guy that can maybe run the underneath stuff, or the opposite of that, take the coverage off the top. Like, I think it's in between those two, where now you are changing the type of receiver that you're looking for. I know that they haven't shown as much interest in those types of guys, but if you get Cortland Sutton, I think that all of a sudden that changes your draft plan for what you are looking for in that other guy.
Yeah, I think it certainly takes some guys maybe down the board, like like you don't need another big guy, like, and so I think maybe you're a little bit more open to maybe, you know, a guy like Jalen McMillan, for example, who's like a bit more of a smaller guy, a slot guy. I think probably in the NFL. Like, I think it's a little easier to make that kind of move if you already got Cortland Sutton. But I mean, I don't know. I think they need 2 wide receivers, so I don't think that like it really changes a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you need multiple guys, and I just think that's what it comes down to for me. It feels like Sutton, in my opinion, is kind of just like a little bit of a diminished value version of Pickens. And not saying it's like a 1-for-1 type of thing. And like I said, I think he's a competent number 2 receiver. It just feels like the skill sets would be a little bit repetitive, and I would be really really hesitant about like just the lack of separation on the outside. If like those two are the type of guys, not saying you need to go get, you know, the best separator in the world. I would just felt like when I was watching, and I could change my opinion too, like if I go back and actually watch Cortland, but I just felt like when I was studying Russ and I watched pretty much every pass he threw last year, I just kept coming back to, like, I think I tweeted it out. It's like, this Broncos receiving core is overrated. Like they just don't get open nearly enough. Like the offense looks just, it really mucked up all the time. And I just feel like bringing that here is just not something that I would probably do if I had other options. But I do understand, like, if the asking price is cheap and it's only a mid-round pick, it could be a short-term fix that you could address other needs instead of having to take a receiver early. So
ESPN, right. For what it's worth, ESPN Analytics gave him a 79 open score, which was 10th in the league last year. I don't know. You know, obviously, I'm not sitting there breaking down that tape and figuring out how they do that. But I think certainly he's a guy that the other part of his game that I like comparing him to George is he's a much better blocker. I think that part, when you look at this offense, they're going to ask their receivers to block, and he's a much more consistent blocker than George is.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah, so it almost makes me wonder, like, you go to one receiver on the field. Is George Pickens even on the field in this case?
Maybe not in the red zone, like where his skills are not necessarily tailor-made for. Yeah.
Any more on the wide receiver market stuff? I know we want to dive into a few other things. So, okay. Alan, you want to take a look at your mock draft or Derrick's big board first?
Let's go to Derrick's big board first. It's big. Got a top 100 here. Derrick put a ton of effort into this. Honestly, just editing it took me like an hour today. And not that Derrick's copy needs a lot of editing. There's just a lot going on here. Derrick, I think the one thing that really stood out to me when I looked at your board compared to maybe the way I see some other people have things lined up. Well, there's a couple things, but really in the first round, you have both of the defensive tackles going, you know, ahead of where the Steelers pick. You have one at 8 and one at 12. And is that in your mind, like, are these guys really good? Like, how are you ranking this in terms of just like, is scarcity a factor here too? Do you think that because there just are not very many defensive tackles in this class. There are not many 315-pound guys in general. Like, where do you see them, and how does that play into like the way you kind of figured out this top group?
Yeah, I think really what I kept coming back to is like when I watched Johnny Newton, like I watched a couple of games, and honestly, he dominated in all of them. And I mean, that's typically a good thing. Like, I watched him tear Penn State to shreds last year. I watched him tear Wisconsin to shreds last year. I just think that when it comes to like the defensive tackle group, I think the NFL is telling us like where the league's headed. We're seeing about it. A lot of these interior rushers get paid. And I think it's going to be starting to be viewed as like a impact premier position. And I just look at Newton, the way that he gets off the ball, how quick his hands are. And like, he doesn't have the longest arms, but he's always able to make first contact. He has a full like tool bag worth of moves. Like, he's just consistently being disruptive in the backfield away from his gap. And I don't really have a ton of concerns about how he's going to hold up against the run. I don't think that he's going to be like a 5-star run defender necessarily, but like, he's a gap shooting 3-tech for me. And I know that he's going to be someone that wins consistently one-on-one. And honestly, I felt the same way about Byron Murphy. He also has a really good first step, but I think his stuff is like more like his raw power and just violence that he plays with in his hands, like, really stood out. The other thing that really felt comfortable for me in terms of like putting them as like those like top 10, top 12 type of caliber of prospects, they both play with phenomenal effort. Like, I mean, I think phenomenal effort is sometimes under discussed in terms of like your best players, because especially as pass rushers, you'll run into sacks, you'll run into pressures just by being consistently around the ball. And they just check so many boxes for me. They're extremely like elite athletes, good pass rushers, both have like all the physical tools that you could want. And I just value, like, I am stunned. I think I said this to Smitty, like maybe like in a conversation a couple of weeks ago. I'm stunned that both of these guys aren't viewed as like consensusly viewed as like some of the best players in the class, especially Newton. I know he's kind of fell out of like people's eyesight because, you know, he didn't work out originally. He had the Jones fracture, which I don't think is going to be a long-term issue. I don't know that I saw like better tape from anyone in this class, really, outside of the receivers, that I did from Johnny Newton. So
I'm actually I'm with you on Newton. I'm a little bit lower on Murphy than this specific. I think he's obviously a first rounder, but like,
yeah.
Newton I can get on board with in the top 10, to be honest with you. I'm with you there. Murphy I'm a little bit lower on. I think Newton is going to be like, I don't know if I can say elite pass rusher from the interior, but like, he has those types of chops. Okay.
I think
well, you're willing to throw that word elite in there. I wasn't willing to go that far, but so for anybody that is listening and not watching, I actually have his board pulled up and we're going through it here on the YouTube side. So I just for sake of that, I wanted to, because I don't know if we included the actual numbers on this, but Johnny Newton comes in as the number 8 overall player for Derrick, with Byron Murphy being number 12. But just going down through here a little bit more, Derrick, was there any that like when you went through, you were like, oh, I know this is going to be much higher, I know this is going to be much lower? Obviously, other than the defensive tackles we just talked
one
about.
that jumps out to me is AD Mitchell at 14.
Oh yeah.
And I think just in general, kind of trying to figure out, okay, obviously the top 3 wide receivers are different. Okay. But after that, I think you can kind of put like Mitchell and Thomas, the top 3 corners, and like all of these top tackles kind of like one, they're in like a big log jam, right? Where it's like, I really think there's going to be a lot of varying opinions, like really from like Fautanu, all the way through the rest of the tackles, and then those top 3 corners and the next 2 wide receivers. Like, one of those guys is going to get drafted at like 10, and one of those guys might get drafted at 30. And I don't really think there's that much of a separation between like a lot of those players. But what did you see about AD Mitchell, maybe specifically, that kind of has him? I think you have him a good bit higher than like most mock drafts do, and certainly as the next best wide receiver. And then just maybe talk a little bit about how you kind of layered, like where you put the second wide receiver compared to the first corner, compared to the third tackle, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like my grading system is pretty like numeric, and I've made some tweaks to it to where I felt like it was, appropriately adjusted across the positions to have a little bit more positional value this year. I do value like receiver as a premier position. I just think for Mitchell specifically, I am head over heels, honestly, like with his skill set, the talent level. I just think that he moves in a way that you just very rarely see for guys that size. I just did a YouTube video on my channel, like right before I jumped on here, that kind of went into this in more depth. But guys that are that flexible in their lower body can create tons of separation pretty much at will, to where you can just kind of throw him on the backside of 3x1s, put him on the line of scrimmage. He can beat press. He can win at all 3 levels. Like, he's got the straight line speed. He's got the ball skills. I mean, You think back to like the Washington playoff game. He just like mistimes his jump on that back shoulder fade. He just hangs in the air and like snatches the ball away from the defender. There's just so much to like about his game. And honestly, like I do understand the concerns about like he's a diabetic and like there's some personality stuff that I think is going to be, what teams are going to have to figure out in like meetings with him. And I assume that's what the Steelers have been doing with all the time that they've spent with him throughout the process. It's just, for me, I look at him on tape and I see a player that I think has like wide receiver one type of potential and could honestly be one of the best receivers in the league. And that to me is a first round player all the time. And there's just not a lot of concerns that I have beyond some effort stuff on tape and the fact that he's not going to be like an extremely good run after catch threat. That really turns me off about him. I think that he can do everything you need to be a high caliber X receiver who separates at an extremely high level. And those are things that I value a lot, like kind of in my grading.
I'm a huge fan as well. Don't have him quite as high as we've had conversation about, but he is wide receiver 4. So still within that same vein. To go back to the question that I asked you though, right before we brought up AD Mitchell, was there somebody else that like just jumped off and you were like, yeah, this guy's way higher for me, or this guy's way lower as I'm working my way down this?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of tough because I try not to look as much at like other people's big boards out. Like once we get like full draft time or like, especially after the combine, like when I'm trying to like go back and do rewatches or get to some guys that I haven't watched a ton. But I think like the consensus board kind of weighs out like some people that I'm a lot higher than the consensus. The other guy that really comes to mind is like Florida State's Renardo Green.
Yep, right on the screen right now. I was just going through here. That's where.
He's the 42nd ranked player for me on my big board, and I think his tape is fantastic. He has, of all the corners that I saw match up with Malik Neighbors, and I pretty much saw them all, he by far played him the best. Like he had so many competitive reps, not just competitive reps, but reps that he won against him. He's battle tested. He will follow receivers around the formation. He loves to get up and press. He's got good footwork. He's really patient at the line of scrimmage. He's extremely sticky in coverage. He doesn't always locate the ball in terms of like locating back and like trying to get takeaways, but he always plays through the hands. He's really physical. He's really tough. I just don't really see I don't see anything that would tell me that he couldn't be like a really solid starter at the next level at the worst, aside from the fact that I think that, because he's so physical, there's going to be, I think, more penalties called on him at the next level. But he kind of reminds me.
Him and Joey.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me a little bit, like play style wise, of L'Jarius Sneed. Like just in terms of like loves to play and press. I think Sneed's a little bit more fluid of an athlete. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Green. I probably watched like 5 games of his or something like that, and yeah, I mean, it was pretty dominant tape, to be honest with you.
I think more versatile than people maybe talk about with him. I mean, Nick and I had a conversation about him, and he's like, hey, if you don't get the gene early, I think you can do some similar stuff with Renardo Green. So, the ability to play inside too, maybe even take on some safety assignments. Yeah, like I think he was super underrated. There was a point in time where he wasn't even in top 100s. He's worked his way into that now through the process, and then to have him here. I think he was my CB7. So don't know where that would put him on a big board, but
yeah, I'm a big fan, man. I think I think he can play from day one too. Like I said, I think the battle tested matchups that he had last season show that he can hang with NFL caliber competition. And he's a confident dude. Like that's something that I think is worth discussing with corners too, because you're out there on an island. You have to be able to hold your own and believe that you're that dude. And Green carries himself like he's got a chip on his shoulder. And I'm really interested to see where he goes. I think if you're a man-heavy scheme that likes to get up and crowd the line of scrimmage, I think Green's like the tailor-made fit for like what you want to do defensively.
The first running back comes in here at 55, I believe, right?
Jonathan Brooks is going to Dallas. Just spoiler alert.
There we go.
Do not have him mocked there. I have him going before Dallas in the second round.
Ooh, where at?
New York Giants.
Okay. Brooks is a really fun runner, man. I enjoy him quite a bit. I had seen my good buddy Nick Martin clipping a bunch of his stuff over the past couple months. And to be honest with you, I didn't even grade any running backs until about 5 days ago. I went back and did a watch of about like the top 8 consensus guys, just to see like where I would fall on them, because I wasn't planning on doing this big of a big board this year, but I couldn't resist.
Anything else regarding this? I'm still just going down here. I don't know if there's anything that sticks out that you really wanted to like highlight or talk about. Either of you. I don't know if Alan, you caught it, your eye caught anything, or
we can talk one player that I think there may be some questions on like why I'm a little bit lower maybe on the consensus is Malachi Corley. Like he finished at number
right here.
90.
Yeah, 90.
Yeah, for me. He finished with like an early day 3 grade, and that's kind of like where he landed on the big board. I think the thing that kind of brings me pause with Corley's game is there's just so much unknown to his game right now. Like he literally was asked to do nothing. Like he basically ran like quick hitches. He did some crossing routes underneath. They threw him an unbelievable amount of screens. Like there was one play that I watched. They threw him a screen on the first 3 plays of the game. Back to back to back. Like that's the type of role he played. I do think he's physical. Obviously, the yards after catch is phenomenal. Like he has great contact balance, great leg drive. He will stiff arm guys to oblivion. I just can't, like as a route runner, like the few times a game he actually got to stride out and like run routes, he's just so unrefined. Like will consistently invite contact. Doesn't know how to get guys off of his frame. He's not really that efficient in and out of his breaks. I just think he's a complete project there. And like, if you're talking like, I think he's like around 50th, I think on the consensus board. So you're talking about spending a 2nd round pick on him.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand how you're going to get that type of value in the first year or two with a player like that you're going to have to scheme all like most of his production up from day one in hopes that he could, eventually be a really good route runner, which is something he could definitely develop. But I don't see anything in his movement skills that makes me think he would be like overly good or special in that regard. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of people I think that are trying to recreate like the Debo thing without realizing some of the actual like receiver stuff that Debo is really good at. But yeah, that's kind of where I fell with him. I'm definitely lower on him than the consensus, which kind of sucks because like I said, I don't really pay much attention to like other big boards, but I actually wrote a column for Steelers Now before the Senior Bowl. And I was like, this is the mid-round receiver that the Steelers want, like that the Steelers need. Like he's good after the catch. And I was thinking that, the Steelers would see him in Mobile. They would be able to get him in like the late 3rd round where they picked. And, this would be a good fit because they needed that kind of asset. And now we're talking about him in the top 50. And it's just too rich for my blood. I think Daniel Jeremiah has him at like 44 or I don't see how you get the value at that range, just personally.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not as low on him, but I'm certainly not with 44. I guess I kind of split the difference between you and Daniel Jeremiah there. Alan, anything else on this? Or do you want to? Should we touch on the picks that you made for the Steelers in this 3-round mock?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I kind of want to just touch on is like there are going to be a lot of trades in this draft on Thursday night, like a lot. I think I predicted 3, maybe 4, and like that's not enough. There's going to be a ton because the board and the team needs, like when you're trying to do it, it's impossible. Like they don't line up. Like they just don't. Like it is a very difficult draft to mock. I think I got 6 first-round picks right last year. I'm not going to get 6 first-round picks right this year. I don't feel that because I don't think that many teams
Where do you
drafting in their slot. Like I think everyone is going to move.
How does that? So, because I saw you say something about that. I heard you say that in the past, and I saw you post about it in this. Is that like, do you have to submit that somewhere? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, they just take them. Yeah, the NFL mock draft database aggregates like every mock draft in the universe from like any, even like quasi legit media outlet. So they take them all and they score them.
But it has to be done on their site.
No, just straight from our site. They take it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I gotcha. All right, makes sense.
Okay, aggregate it straight from everyone's website, so it's on there.
I'll tell you what, mine last year I posted it like mine had to be up there for sure.
I don't know if they do any like that, like where it's like anyone can submit them. This is just like media. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like it's really hard. Like it's hard to get the teams in the right places. So I have the I have the Arizona Cardinals moving down from 4. The Vikings coming up to get JJ McCarthy, and then moving back up to 8 to get Roma Dunze. Like I can see that combination of things happening. I think it's like something like that has to happen, but getting the exact trades right is very difficult. Like, you know, and so very easily could happen at 3 or at 5 instead of at 4, or it happen at, the move back up comes at 7 or 9 instead of 8, whatever. I think it's really difficult to, but I think the way the board falls for the Steelers by the time you get to 20 in my mock draft is the board that I think they will get. And that is having Amarius Mims and Graham Barton and Brian Thomas and Cooper DeJean as kind of like the 4 guys that seem like they're available to them, that are, decent value. Actually, do I have DeJean? Maybe I have DeJean. I have DeJean going ahead. But I think that's kind of the board that they're going to be looking at. And I think really, like we've been talking about, the decision for the Steelers mostly comes down to those 2 linemen. I think they'll both be there. I think there's a chance, like you work it a couple different ways. I have the Bengals taking J.C. Latham at 18. They could easily go defensive tackle, and then Latham falls to the Steelers. So I think there's a lot of ways it can work, but it's a really tough first round to put together, man.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't done my official one yet, but I mean, going through all the simulations that I have.
Anything in the first round that like I don't know if there's anything you want to address. Darius Robinson going to the Baltimore Ravens in the first round is like a bit of an off the board projection. Just really feels like a Raven to me.
I think it's him or Marshawn Nealand. I think one of those 2 definitely go round 1. So I can't.
When you look at the needs, there's so many more teams that need like edge rushers and D tackles than I think there are guys like that in this draft, especially after you get through like the first 15 picks. Like it seems like everybody needs them. So like guys,
I love Johnny Newton for Detroit. If for some reason he fell that far, that's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know where he goes. Like, I don't know where the D tackles go earlier than where I put them. Cincinnati's one they could take one earlier. I'm not really sure. I think they're good players. It just doesn't seem like the needs are weird. That's what I'm saying. Like these teams are going to trade. Like they're like he's not falling to 20. So I just didn't pick a trade for someone to go up to get him like I did with like Quinyon Mitchell, where I had the Eagles going up to get. Like I think there's going to be a lot of trades.
In your mock, the Carolina Panthers did not keep their promise to Xavier Legette.
Liars.
No, I had them taking Ladd McConkey instead. And then the Patriots get Legette at 34. So yeah, I have the Steelers taking Mims. I still think that's the pick. I think it's the best value. I think he's a great player. I think if you're going for it, you go for it. And he's the guy that I think will be the best player of the guys that they can draft. So, and then I guess the other part of this that looks suspicious, but I promise you is not, is that I have Zach Frazier falling all the way to them at 51. Maybe unlike like defensive tackle, like there are a couple spots in there and where I can see now I have Jackson Powers Johnson going out of the first round, going to Carolina at 39. There are a couple spots in there where you can make an argument that an interior lineman should go, but there aren't as many teams when you start to like, if he makes it past 35, it starts to look pretty good, I think, for the Steelers for him to get to 51. There just are not that many teams in there that really need a center. And so I think that's Philly. I have Philly trading 50. Philly would be one that's interesting, right? Because they do have some options, but they did obviously just lose Jason Kelsey. And so maybe Philly at 50 is one they will need to watch out for. But I think if he gets, and look, he could go in the first round, but I think if he gets past about 35, it starts to look okay for him to get to them. And then the third round, I've got him taking Jalen McMillan and Jerry and Jones from Florida State. It's a crapshoot when you get this far in terms of predicting an actual player, but those are 2 guys I like in terms of the fit and what they'd be asked to do right away. I think could be pretty good fits.
Yeah, I mean, if this is what they ended day 2 with, you're not going to hear a complaint from me with this haul.
Oh, I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy with that. I think 51 is good value for Frazier. Mims is, somebody that I definitely think, based on his tape, like there's no reason you shouldn't take him in the top 20. A little bit concerned about the durability stuff, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, scared money don't make money, and like he has the tackle ability, like he has the ability to be, one of the better right tackles in the league from a pass protection standpoint, which is, and ultimately what I think you should value more than anything else. So, Frazier definitely should be like an above average to good starter. McMillan, a guy that I'm higher on than the consensus, I think. So, Millen's another guy who can win like at all 3 levels, like created a bunch of big plays. He's a killer on option routes. Like if you want a route runner type and somebody that knows how to get open underneath and separate, really good hands as well. I think that people are really forgetting how good he was 2 years ago, like because he was so banged up this past season, he wasn't ever like fully healthy until like after the season was actually over. I think people are really sleeping on just like what type of player he really can be, and I really do think he can be like a high end wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2 at the bare minimum, pretty early on in his rookie career, to be honest with you.
I'm thankful. I want to thank you for leaving a lot of these others considered as being just that. Because I'm not a Tez Walker guy. I'm certainly not a Jeremiah Trotter guy, and I wouldn't take Johnny Wilson in the spot either. So I appreciate you just considering them and not actually picking them. Javon Baker, I would have liked to.
I don't think it's a very great board, honestly, considering the kind of options that could have been there at 84. But you don't really have any control over that when you're making it. And then Jerry Jones, obviously, connection with the Steelers. Anthony Midget was his position coach of Florida State. And I think you can make an argument to go a couple different directions with that pick, but I didn't really like the value at linebacker, defensive tackle. So I want the best slot corner I think I could find.
Yeah, I mean, looking at what you considered to have been him or DJ James at Auburn for me with that pick. So
Tyke Smith maybe, but I think he's like a guy that you could probably wait on.
Yeah, I don't think you would have had to pick him there. So, all right. Anything else? One more of these bad boys before the draft.
It is. We're gonna go live tomorrow. We can decide what time we want to do it. I think earlier is probably better for us and lets it sit there for longer. But I think we'll get more people if we go later. So I don't know if you want to kind of split the difference about the timing. We can work on that. But we'll be live tomorrow. There will be some video from someone Thursday night after the pick, me or Nick or some combination of us. Maybe we'll get Derrick involved. And then Friday, kind of a normal episode. Going to try for some kind of guest relating to the first round pick. And that'll be the focus of the Friday show. And then, again, some kind of video on the channel here Friday night after the second round. And then, of course, we'll also have video from the first round pick, which will happen on Friday. We'll have Mike and Omar on Thursday. So all kinds of stuff coming up.
And during the draft, if you'd like to hang out and watch, I am going to be doing a live stream on both channels, cross-streaming it on Around the 412 and also right here on the Steelers Now YouTube channel. So you don't need to go anywhere else. As long as you guys hit that notification bell, you will know when we go live on the channel probably 15 minutes before the draft starts, because the first year we did it, we learned our lesson. Went live way too early, and we were sitting there for like an hour before a pick was actually made. So we're not going to do that again. But anyways, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when that happens. Other than that, Derrick, tell the people where they can find you.
At Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. And obviously all of my written work can be found on SteelersNow.com.
There we go. And
Saunders_PGH Steelers Now. That's where you got Derrick's Top 100. That's where you got my mock draft. That's where you get all the news of the day, some of which is not news, some of which was news, salary cap update, all that stuff is there. And, all the stuff you need to watch draft day, right? You want to have Derrick's Top 100. You want to have our big board available with all the visits and the interviews and all that stuff on there. So get it all ready to go for draft night while you're watching, and we'll keep it all linked at the top for you. And yeah, man, I'm excited.
What's going to be was what I want people to do, because we're going to be live tomorrow. This would be harder to do in a live chat, and also cutting it very close. People might comment afterwards. So let's do it on today's episode. I want you guys in the comments to give us your mock drafts for the Steelers. So picks, players, all that good stuff. We want as much input as possible into what you guys think. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you are listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever that might be. I'm Zachary Smith, PGH. Until tomorrow, for Alan Saunders, Derrick Bell, and myself, thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.